The Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Armed Forces Commissioner Bill, not amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
No.
We will begin with new clause 1, with which it will be convenient to consider other new clauses and amendments as listed on the selection paper. I call Helen Maguire to move new clause 1.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move new clause 1. This is an important bill and one that I and my Liberal Democrat colleagues broadly welcome. However, it's one that we believe can and must go further. Before turning to the detail of our proposed changes, I want to acknowledge the significance of this legislation and the opportunity it presents to deliver meaningful change for the Armed Forces community. I thank the Minister and his team for all the hard work they've put into bringing this bill to the House. The Armed Forces Commissioner, as proposed in this bill, will serve as an independent and vital advocate for service personnel and their families, reporting directly to Parliament. This role is long overdue. For too long, service personnel and their families have felt neglected, overlooked and unsupported. The Commissioner's remit will include addressing a wide range of issues, from unacceptable behaviours and substandard housing to equipment concerns. The power to visit defence sites unannounced and commission reports is particularly welcome, as is the consolidation of the Service Complaints Ombudsman's responsibilities into this more robust role. The Liberal Democrats welcome these provisions as steps in the right direction, but steps alone are not enough. Delivering a fair deal for the Armed Forces community is not just morally right, it is a strategic imperative. Recruitment and retention challenges directly impact our national security. We cannot allow systemic neglect to erode the morale, trust and effectiveness of those who defend our nation. Time and again, reports like the Haythornwaite and Atherton reviews have highlighted the failures of previous governments, failures to provide decent housing, support service families adequately, or tackle issues like discrimination and sexual harassment. These are not new revelations, they are systemic problems that require a new approach. The former Conservative government failed to deliver for our armed forces. The Liberal Democrats will continue to call for a fair deal, including strengthening the Armed Forces Covenant, ensuring that service accommodation is fit for purpose and delivering for those who put their lives on the line for our country. This bill is an opportunity to begin addressing these issues comprehensively, and I'm proud to propose amendments that will ensure it delivers for all members of the Armed Forces community. I turn to new clause 1. This seeks to extend the Commissioner's remit to include individuals going through the recruitment process. At present, the bill excludes these individuals, but recruits can face challenges during this initial formative stage. Recruits can be asked to stay on bases overnight, and we cannot ignore that they may encounter issues during such trips. It is essential to understand these issues to retain these recruits, as many currently drop out. We assume this is due to the long waits that they are currently experiencing, but it may also stem from issues that we are unaware of. This new clause would ensure that support is available from the very start of their journey into the Armed Forces, not just after they sign on the dotted line. Our Amendment 1 addresses another critical omission in the bill. The current bill leaves the definition of relevant family members to the government, which creates ambiguity and risks exclusion. Our amendment would ensure that kinship carers and the family members of deceased service personnel are explicitly included. These groups face unique challenges, and it is vital that they are not left behind. The creation of the Armed Forces Commissioner is a positive development, but we need to ensure the role is truly independent, adequately resourced and held to account for its actions. Several key issues must be addressed to guarantee the Commissioner's effectiveness. For the Commissioner to function properly, they must have adequate financial and practical support. Without sufficient resources, the Commissioner will struggle to fulfil their vital responsibilities. Our Amendment 3 places a direct duty on the Secretary of State to ensure that the Commissioner's office is properly resourced, both financially and practically, to carry out its work effectively. This ensures that the role is not hampered by a lack of support. Additionally, transparency and accountability are essential. If the Commissioner is to be a meaningful advocate for service personnel and their families, their work must be open to scrutiny. Our Amendment 4 requires the Commissioner to publish annual reports to Parliament, ensuring that their efforts are transparent and that they can be held accountable for their actions. These reports will allow Parliament, the public and service personnel to understand the welfare issues faced by service personnel and their families. To further safeguard the independence and credibility of the Commissioner, our Amendment 5 would have their appointment to be subject to pre-appointment scrutiny by Parliamentary Select Committee. This process would allow Members of Parliament to ensure that the best person for the job is appointed. This person needs to be independent of government influence and focused on the needs of the armed forces community. This additional scrutiny will help safeguard the integrity of the role and ensure it remains focused on the needs of the armed forces community. Further, the Armed Forces Covenant should be central to the Commissioner's work. The Covenant is a fundamental framework that guides how we treat our service personnel and their families, ensuring fairness and respect in all aspects of their lives. Our Amendment 7 would enshrine the Covenant's principles in the Commissioner's remit, ensuring that these values remain at the heart of their mission. Given the Covenant is at the heart of how we support our armed forces, it should be explicitly included in this bill. And it is essential that we do not delay putting this bill into action. That is why our Amendment 6 would require the Secretary of State to publish a timeframe for the appointment of the Commissioner within 6 months of the passing of the Act. Our armed forces and their families need this service urgently and cannot wait around for years for action to be taken. Following the damning findings of the Atherton and Etherton report, it's clear that minority groups, including women, ethnic minorities, LGBT+ personnel and non-UK nationals, face systemic challenges within the armed forces. The Atherton report, published in 2021, focused on the experience of women in the armed forces. 4,000 female service personnel and veterans completed a survey to inform the inquiry. Shockingly, 62% of respondents had been victims of bullying, discrimination, harassment, sexual assault during their service, sometimes at the hands of senior officers. It's unacceptable that women who serve in the armed forces too often face sexual harassment or misogyny. This issue has not been adequately addressed, reflecting a lack of moral courage within parts of the armed forces, despite good intentions across the services. Our Amendment 2 would require the Commissioner to take specific action to consider and address issues facing service personnel from minority groups, not only for our female service personnel, but also for those who are BAME, LGBT+, or not from the UK. This would be backed by annual reporting to ensure transparency and accountability. This is essential to ensure that all voices are heard and no one in the armed forces community is overlooked. In conclusion, this bill must be part of a wider effort to improve the quality of life of service personnel and their families. Housing, for instance, remains a persistent issue. Decent housing is not a privilege, it's a right, and service families deserve homes that are safe, comfortable and fit for purpose. Just last week in this House, my colleague, the Honourable Member for Taunton and Wellington, tabled an amendment to the Renters' Right Bill to extend the Decent Home Standard to the Ministry of Defence Service Family Accommodation, ensuring that all members of the armed forces have the living standards they deserve. I was beyond disappointment when the Government voted this down. This bill represents progress, but is not the finished article. Although I do not wish to push new Clause 1 to a vote, our proposed changes are about fairness, accountability and doing right by all those who serve and their families. Let us seize this moment to deliver real and lasting change for the armed forces community. They have given so much for us. It's time we gave back to them.
Applicability to prospective recruits.
The question is that new Clause 1 be read a second time. Singh, Dhesi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise today primarily to address Amendment 5, which the spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats just alluded to, which directly impacts the role of the Defence Select Committee, which I have the honour and privilege to chair. Amendment 5 proposes to enshrine in law an enhanced version of Select Committee pre-appointment scrutiny. This is significant because, in most cases, such scrutiny is a matter of political agreement rather than legislation. The Government has committed to pre-appointment scrutiny by the Defence Committee for the preferred candidate for Armed Forces Commissioner. This mirrors the existing arrangement for the Service Complaints Ombudsman, the only defence-related post currently subject to this form of scrutiny. The Defence Committee last conducted such a hearing in December 2024, the current Ombudsman. So it's likely that our scrutiny of the Armed Forces Commissioner candidate will be both our first and final pre-appointment hearing in this Parliament. Let me clarify, Madam Deputy Speaker, the purpose of pre-appointment scrutiny. It aims to examine the quality of ministerial decision-making and appointments, assure the public that key public appointments are indeed merit-based, demonstrate the candidate's independence of mind, and bolster the appointees' legitimacy in their role. It's crucial to understand that this process does not replicate the recruitment process. We cannot assess the candidate pool or suggest alternatives. Our primary task is to evaluate how the preferred candidate performs under public scrutiny. In the Public Bill Committee, the Minister for the Armed Forces... yes, I will give way.
I thank the Chair of the Defence Select Committee for giving way. Does he not agree with me that it's not merely a question of scrutiny, but actually of approval? If the Defence Select Committee, which he so ably chairs, decides that the persons brought before them are not fit for that role, then is it not up to the Secretary of State to go and find somebody else who can pass the approval of the Select Committee?
I thank my honourable friend for his kind words, and indeed he has made a massive impact within the workings of the Defence Committee, of which he is himself a member. The very point that he has raised, that is precisely the issues that I will be coming into very, very shortly. So patience is a virtue, but I will definitely directly address what my honourable friend has just said. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the Public Bill Committee, the Minister for the Armed Forces stated that our scrutiny should be vigorous and thorough. I assure the House that given appropriate time and opportunity, it will be exactly that. The Minister also expressed expectations at committee stage for our scrutiny to go above and beyond the current process. I seek clarity on this point from the Minister. So how does the government envisage the Defence Committee exceeding the current process without procedural changes? I would appreciate if the Minister could elaborate on this particular matter. Does the government have specific proposals to enable us to go above and beyond? My second question for the government is about implementation, which is the subject of Amendment 6. Following a pre-appointment hearing, the Defence Committee will recommend either appointing or rejecting the preferred candidate. For this process to be meaningful, the implementation plan must account for the possibility, however remote, of the Secretary of State facing a negative committee opinion, as my honourable friend just alluded to. The Service Complaints Ombudsman has informed us that under current legislation, casework processing halts without an ombudsman in post. We must avoid a scenario where rejecting a candidate would so severely impact service personnel, the ombudsman team, and the broader transition that approval becomes the only viable option. I seek assurances that this consideration is already part of implementation planning. So I hope that the Minister will elaborate on that particular point. The Ombudsman, Madam Deputy Speaker, also raised broader transition concerns in her evidence to the Defence Committee just last week. I trust the Minister is aware of and seriously addressing these issues. Other amendments before the House address the Commissioner's independence, which the Liberal Democrat spokesperson alluded to, minority group experiences in the armed forces, and the scope of the Commissioner's remit. These echo questions our committee has raised with the Secretary of State in our published correspondence. I hope that the government will carefully consider these points, regardless of whether they accept the specific amendments. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I eagerly await the Minister's responses to my two questions. How does he expect the Defence Committee to go above and beyond the current pre-appointment scrutiny process? And can he assure the House that the implementation plan accommodates the possibility of needing to extend the recruitment process and will not be put at risk if the Defence Committee recommends against appointing a candidate? Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
No, he wants to hear afterwards. I'm sort of waiting for somebody to fall. David Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I stand today in support of Amendment 2 proposed by the Honourable Member for Epsom. As the Member of Parliament for Brecon, Radnor and Tawe, I am proud to represent a constituency with a deep and enduring military history. It is home to Brecon Barracks, the headquarters of the British Army in Wales, and the 160th Welsh Brigade, alongside the Sennybridge training area, where thousands of British service members train in the Brecon Beacons. My constituency is also home to a vibrant Nepalese community made up of former Gurkha soldiers and their families, an integral part of our community's fabric. Gurkhas, renowned across the world for their bravery, professionalism and humility, have called the Brecon area home for over 50 years. They've settled here during their distinguished service in the British Army and have since become an invaluable pillar of our local society. In fact, Brecon is now proudly twinned with Dampus in Nepal, symbolising the bond between our two nations. However, it is the past treatment of Gurkhas in the UK that compels me to support this amendment. Despite their service to the United Kingdom, the Gurkhas have faced significant discrimination for many decades. Many will remember the Gurkha Justice Campaign, which gained momentum thanks to the tireless efforts of Dame Joanna Lumley and the support of the Liberal Democrats under Nick Clegg. It was through this campaign that a crucial parliamentary vote was won, granting all Gurkha veterans the right to reside in the UK, despite opposition from the Labour government of the time. But it wasn't only residency rights where the Gurkhas faced discrimination. They faced inadequate support after leaving active service, receiving less pay than their British counterparts for the same jobs, and many were deprived of fair pensions. Even today, veterans who served before 1997 continue to struggle for equal recognition and treatment. It's my firm belief that this amendment, especially the call for the Armed Forces Commissioner to produce annual reports on the challenges faced by specific groups and to establish mechanisms for community engagement, will help ensure that no group ever has to suffer injustice like the Gurkhas ever again. And I urge all members to join me in supporting this vital amendment.
Luke Akehurst.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've rise primarily to talk about Amendment 2 from the Honourable Lady from the Liberal Democrats. It was an honour to serve on the Bill Committee, and I would actually have spoken about Amendment 2 had it been moved at the Bill Committee. It was in the papers, but I think there was a timetabling issue that meant that it couldn't be moved in the committee. There's actually already a public sector equality duty under the Equality Act 2010 that would apply to the Commissioner. When the Commissioner was undertaking their reports, they would be bound by that duty to have due regard to the different minority groups that form the armed forces and their families. In terms of more specific thematic reports in relation to issues faced by minorities in the armed forces, that ought to be a matter for the Commissioner to decide. I'm also perturbed as someone with a disability myself, the absence of disabled people from the list of minorities that's cited. I think that that's the problem when you start to table amendments with a prescriptive list of different minority groups, that you can miss out groups and make some groups feel that their concerns might be more valued than others, and it's not completely incompatible with service in the armed forces to have a disability. Clearly, some physical disabilities make service on the front line difficult, but there are other roles that people with legally defined with a disability or self-identifying as having a disability might be able to serve in, and indeed the most famous admiral in the Royal Navy's history was Horatio Nelson, who had two disabilities. He had one arm and one eye. So I think it's unfortunate to have gone for the prescriptive listing, and in any case, for the reasons I set out at the start of my remarks, unnecessary. I won't detain the House with my take on some of the other amendments, because I'm sure there are other honourable members that will wish to come in on those clauses, but my general assessment would be that I feel that the list of clauses that have been, of amendments that have been moved are well-intentioned but unnecessary because the face of the bill already deals with the concerns that are being raised.
Jim Allister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is good to see the Armed Forces Commissioner put on a statutory basis, to see the functions set out, to see how that staff, though perhaps not directly recruited, can be provided for the Commission, and all that is good. But that causes me to think, yes, we're making provision for our current serving members of the armed forces. Why are we not making parallel statutory provision for our veterans? Why is it that it's right to have a statutory basis for the Armed Forces Commissioner, but not to have a statutory basis for the various veteran commissioners? Surely, if it's right for serving members, it must equally be right to have a statutory basis setting out the functions, ensuring staff provision for the veterans commissioners. I take the case in the part of the United Kingdom I know best. We have a part-time, term-appointed veterans commissioner for effectively 2 days a week, with 2 staff seconded from the Northern Ireland office. And yet he is charged with looking after all the interests of the very many thousands of veterans that, unsurprisingly, we have in Northern Ireland. Now, if it's right, I make the point again, to have a commissioner on a statutory basis for serving soldiers, then why not for veterans? And I think it would be a significant step forward, not just in itself, but a significant nod to how we value our veterans community if we were to give them that equality of treatment on this issue. And I think that is something that is very important. And without being on a statutory basis, a part-time, appointed with seconded staff veterans commissioner, frankly, has his hands tied behind his back. You know, in Northern Ireland, we're moving back into a phase where, because this government is going to repeal the Legacy Act, we're going to see many veterans from incidents of 50 years ago dragged through our courts, perhaps. A veteran commissioner with no standing to intervene in the multiple judicial reviews that take place about those issues. No standing to take any official line on any of that. And yet, put the Veterans Commissioner on a statutory basis with the available funding, then there's a role to be performed, not just in that specific, perhaps if there is a challenging judicial review about an issue that touches upon the issues of veterans. Why shouldn't the Veterans Commissioner be able to be a notice and an intervening party in proceedings such as that? I think he should.
Member Gilby.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And does the member then have that concern in regards to the fact that the Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner staff are appointed by the Northern Ireland office, as is he? So, and again, in that freedom, that ability to actually challenge the government with force, with vigour, without having to continually look over their shoulder to what may be a perceived oversight from the NIO at all times, that independence was actually strengthened their role?
I absolutely agree. And it's one of the strengths of this bill that it purports to give an independence to the Armed Forces Commissioner. All the more need for the Veterans Commissioner to have the same independence. But if all the Veterans Commissioner has is 2 staff that he doesn't choose, not that there's anything wrong with the staff, they're very good staff, but they're not appointed by his office. They are handpicked by the NIO and seconded to him. It creates the wrong perception, and very often that's enough to do damage to an office. So I do take the opportunity of this debate to say, yes, what we're doing for the Armed Forces Commissioner is good, but let's mirror it by what we do for our veterans. Yes?
The topic of the relationship between the Armed Forces Commissioner and veterans was something that cropped up several times in the Public Bill Committee, and I commend the Honourable Member to our new Clause 2 on this subject. But on the specific matter of the Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner, he know that one recently resigned, partly because he had concerns about constraints on his independence to carry out his role. That's something that concerns us on these benches. Does it concern the Honourable Gentleman as well?
It does, because when a former member of this House, Mr Danny Kinahan, was appointed Veterans Commissioner with his army experience, there was great expectation upon his shoulders. And sadly, we reached the point where amongst the reasons proffered by Mr Kinahan for leaving his role was exactly as the Right Honourable Gentleman says, because he felt his freedom of action was impinged by the Northern Ireland office. But be that right or be that wrong, the perception that such an office holder has those restraints placed upon him does untold damage to that office. And I think, as I have in the past, I pay tribute to Mr Kinahan for his service in that role, and I also wish well his recently appointed successor, Mr David Johnson, who had the privilege of meeting last week, and trust that as he takes forward the work of of representing veterans, he will find himself unrestrained. But I say this, government can put all this beyond doubt, and the way to put it beyond doubt is to put the Veterans Commissioner on the same statutory footing as the Armed Forces Commissioner. Yes?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. I certainly join him in paying tribute to Danny Kinahan, who, as a minister who has some dealings with me, I certainly would say did a very good job indeed. I wish his successor all the very best. Will he acknowledge that the previous government actually went one step further, in the sense that they appointed a Minister for Veterans of cabinet rank, a very experienced individual, which this government has failed to replicate?
That is true, but they failed to take the step I'm now advocating of putting the Veterans Commissioner on his statutory footing. So this government can go one better and can do the right thing for veterans, and I trust that they will. I do support new Clause 2 that has been proposed. I think it's a step in the right direction, but it's not enough. We need to have, for our retired servicemen, facilities that we offer to our serving servicemen. Yeah.
Thanks. Before the member does step down, and again, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Ulster Unionist Party would support new Clause 2 in regards to that, but also to pay tribute to my predecessor as the Ulster Unionist MP for South Antrim, Mr Kinnigan, and the work that he did in this place, but continued to do for veterans. And again, I do wish David Johnson well. But I think it's the point that was made from the front bench of the opposition in regards to the position of the Veterans Minister. Would the member agree with me there's an opportunity that the Veterans Minister would actually be responsible for appointing the Veterans Commissioner for Northern Ireland rather than the NIO, and there may be a segregation of perception in regards to some of those concerns that our veterans community would have?
I think that's a fair point, because in truth, Madam Deputy Speaker, our veterans community, as they see some of their brethren from within that community facing historic investigation do align the genesis and the support for that investigation with the NIO. And therefore, it certainly would be better, both presentationally and in reality, I believe, if there was that distance between the Veterans Commissioner and the Northern Ireland Office. Yes?
Giving way. Does he agree with me that it's actually to the discredit of the opposition they do not actually even have a shadow Veterans Minister at all who could pick up some of these issues that he is indeed bringing forward?
Well, if there's a feeling on that side, then all the greater opportunity and need for the government to make good on that, and I trust that they will do that. I'm not here to mediate between either side of this House. Yes, certainly.
For the record, I'm the Shadow Veterans Minister. I am the Shadow Armed Forces Minister. I do a bit of procurement on the side as well. So we do take veterans very seriously on this side of the House. But as I'm going to say later on, if I'm lucky enough to catch your eye, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not sure the government does.
Well, I will leave the two sides of this House to sort out that difference. All I'm interested in is that the veterans in my community have the best opportunity, the best service, and with the best will in the world. Yes, we've got and have had good Veterans Commissioners, but they cannot do the job so long as their hands are tied behind their back. Let's unleash them and let's see a basis upon which they can properly perform the functions. Thank you.
Leigh Ingham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to put my strongest support forward for the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill. This legislation marks a significant step forward in ensuring that our armed forces personnel receive the care and support they deserve. As Member of Parliament for Stafford, I'm acutely aware of the challenges faced by many of our service personnel and veterans. So my constituency, around 5.5% of residents are veterans, in addition to just under 1,000 serving personnel. For years, we've needed a national focus on the needs of serving personnel. By establishing an independent voice to investigate welfare matters, we can ensure that serving personnel have a dedicated champion who is able to bring their concerns to the forefront. I'm also very pleased that the bill will address long-standing issues within the current complaints process by transferring powers from the Service Complaints Ombudsman to the new Commissioner. This will provide serving personnel and their families with a much-needed avenue to address their grievances, and I know that for some of my constituents, it will make a huge difference for them. I also know that this government is laser-focused on supporting our serving personnel and their families, and this is only one step in our plans to change the lives of those who serve, those who have served, and their families. I'd also just like to speak briefly to the amendment that the Honourable Member for North Durham spoke to earlier, specifying that the Commissioner must engage with certain groups. I would have given that to be expected as part of the role, and I think also that specifying those does make the mistake of sometimes missing groups, as he has so rightly pointed out. I would also suggest that there's no need to divide the House on this issue. I think it's something that would be expected of any Commissioner. Because this bill is about much more than policies and procedures, it's about recognising the immense sacrifices made by our service personnel and providing them with the support they deserve, providing a healthier culture for them to serve our country in. I commend the government for taking this step and for all regiments across the country, not just those based in Stafford. And I would urge all members to support this vital legislation for our serving soldiers and serving personnel. It's only by supporting those people that we can also support the veterans of the future.
Pam Cox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was a pleasure to serve on the Bill Committee for the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill and to have the opportunity to hear from representatives of military charities, armed forces families, organisations, as well as from the current Service Complaints Ombudsman for the Armed Forces. I've also had the chance to discuss the bill and the proposed amendments with representatives from our armed forces community in my own constituency in Colchester, home to 16 Air Assault Brigade and many veterans' organisations. I've also raised it with the many people I've met on some fantastically insightful visits to army facilities around the country as a member of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, and I thoroughly recommend that scheme to other members of the House. Yeah. Today I had the pleasure of meeting with E50K, a defence-led community interest company supporting armed forces families in navigating the challenges of service and civilian life. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a significant opportunity with this Armed Forces Commissioner Bill to create a positive step change in the relationship between the defence community and the organisations currently in place to support it. So my conversations on this with those various groups suggest that the current situation is that advocacy, policy and complaints, there are multiple restrictions as to what issues can be raised and how they can be raised. And there's a need to change the current mindset of concern within the defence community about raising an issue without experiencing repercussions in terms of career progression in relation to the chain of command. Now, regardless of whether that's a reality, it's the perception of many of our service families. And the Armed Forces Commissioner will change this by creating a new chance for the defence community to advocate for real change to meet their needs. And it will crucially do this by reducing barriers and fostering a culture of being listened to rather than being done to. But it can only do that if it's an independent office. So my concern about these amendments, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that they have the potential, although considered and put in good faith, they have the potential to undermine the independence of the Commissioner, and it's that crucial independence which is so vital here. So I'm very proud to support this bill for the impact it will have in my constituency in Colchester and across the country for the future of our armed forces community.
Lincoln Jopp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise to speak primarily in support of Amendment 8, but with some broader reflections on the bill. I think we all need to be very clear that the welfare of service personnel is the responsibility of the military chain of command. And no other supernumerary bureaucratic organisation can take that responsibility away from the chain of command. I personally am concerned that this bill could potentially do something to undermine the authority of the chain of command, and I'll expand on that theme. But I also agree with the Honourable and Gallant Member for Epsom and Ewell that we have seen too many examples of service personnel being poorly treated in their service. And if it weren't for the fact that that were the case, arguably we wouldn't have had a need for the Armed Forces Complaints Ombudsman and now for the Armed Forces Commissioner. So having said that welfare is the responsibility of the chain of command, I do actually think that Amendment 8, by making it very clear that there is a separation between the authority of that chain of command and the independence of the Armed Forces Commissioner, is going to be critical. As I understand it, the provenance of this bill was that the government thought that the remit of the Armed Forces Complaints Ombudsman was too narrow. And so they have added in the responsibility for welfare. Now, welfare is a very broad word, actually, and it means quite a lot to quite a lot of different people. For some people, it means housing. For some people, it means education. It can mean a whole myriad of things. And we know this because General Rommel commented that the best form of welfare is better training, because better training makes for fewer widows. And so that's the way that Rommel saw welfare. And equally, when I'm mentioning German, the model for this is the German Armed Forces Commissioner. And the German Armed Forces Commissioner is there to ensure that the members of the German Armed Forces' inalienable rights are not impinged on by the giving of illegal orders. And that's their sole remit. And yet that has grown. They have never had a case in 40 years where they have found that a member of the German Armed Forces has indeed been given an illegal order. And yet that organisation has grown to a staff of over 60, and their main areas of recommendation or concern are equipment. I will give way.
I thank the honourable and gallant member for giving way. The German Armed Forces Commissioner was the inspiration for this bill, but it is quite different, the example that this government is putting in place, because in Germany the Commissioner sits effectively as a Member of Parliament and takes parliamentary staff. That isn't the case with the UK version. Does he not see the differences between the German legislation and this one before us today?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I do acknowledge that important difference, and I think that Amendment 8 actually does seek to enhance and strengthen the independence from the chain of command of the Armed Forces Commissioner, and I commend it to him. But the German Armed Forces Commissioner finds itself reporting and making recommendations on areas such as equipment, undermanning, things which are well beyond the inalienable human rights of German service personnel not to be given an illegal order. And so I think my watchword is that untrammelled, this will grow arms and legs. Not only have we widened it to welfare, which, as I've argued, is incredibly broadly interpretable, we are giving the Armed Forces Commissioner an access all areas pass, and also we've enabled members of the Armed Forces families, wider families, to be in touch with the Armed Forces Commissioner, something which the German model does not follow. And so, while supporting Amendment 8 and the chain of command, I'm glad I've had the opportunity, and I'm grateful to the House, to put on record. I will, of course, give way.
I thank the honourable and gallant gentleman for giving way. I'm just concerned that the tone of his remarks suggests that he doesn't really support the thrust of the bill and is extremely sceptical about the need for or the potential areas of involvement of the Armed Forces Commissioner per se. And I was under the impression from the opposition front bench that there was a consensus across the House in favour of the thrust of the bill, and we were going to be talking today about nuance and detail. So I'm seeking reassurance from the honourable and gallant gentleman that he does in fact support the need for an Armed Forces Commissioner.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I think he will remember from his time on the Bill Committee that my right honourable friend, the front bench spokesman, referred to us as fulfilling a role of being a critical friend. And I offer these as a critical friend, and I think that it is important for people listening to this debate and referring to these proceedings at a later time that they realise that utterly untrammelled, these things will generate a bureaucracy all of their own. And we do not wish this to be a good idea that you have in peacetime, which becomes a massive hindrance as we approach a period of conflict. Madam Deputy Speaker.
Graeme Downie.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I congratulate the Government on bringing this bill forward so early in the new Government's term. It was a pleasure, along with friends from across the House, to serve on the Bill Committee for this legislation and to hear from existing Service Complaints Ombudsmen, as well as charities such as Poppy Scotland and the Royal British Legion. I would also like to thank the clerks and the staff on the committee who helped and supported myself as a new member and the first time I had served on such a committee. It was also particularly positive to hear the strong cross-party consensus for this legislation, with both the Shadow Minister and my honourable and gallant member for Epsom and Ewell supporting this legislation, although I had a similar concern to my honourable friend just now in the intervention from the member for Spelthorne, where I felt he was perhaps not supporting this legislation. I hope that is not the case. I have to say, on the Bill Committee, Madam Deputy Speaker, I didn't think I would be discussing the different powers and political structures between the US Senate and this Parliament with the Shadow Minister, but it was indeed very interesting and enjoyable as well. And of course, I do understand the need, in fact the duty, of His Majesty's loyal opposition to properly scrutinise legislation. But I do hope that after this debate on the amendments today, this House will speak with one voice in support of this legislation and that there will be no need to divide the House. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government has already shown in its commitment to our armed forces, with the largest pay rise in over 20 years, tackling recruitment by removing outdated policies and boosting retention through payments of £8,000 for certain army personnel and £30,000 for some aircraft engineers. The government is also doing more to support veterans, and it was a pleasure to welcome the Veterans Minister to my constituency last week, where he visited Bravehound and Ghost Force Canine, two organisations run by veterans to support veterans' mental health using the walking and training of dogs. Madam Deputy Speaker, the problems this bill seeks to begin to tackle are well known. 14 years of our armed forces being hollowed out and underfunded by the last Conservative government, and in Scotland an SNP government with seemingly little interest in supporting personnel for their own petty political reasons, and failing even to properly recognise the role of the Scottish defence industry to our national economy. And it is notable once again on an issue which will affect armed forces personnel in Scotland that there are no members of the SNP in their place. We have a crisis in military morale and recruitment, and under the last government only 4 in 10 personnel reported they were satisfied with service life, the lowest reported level on record, with the impact on family life and personal life the top factor influencing their decision to leave. All of this while we live in an increasingly unstable world where it looks more and more likely our armed forces will be needed to carry out further roles around the world. Moving to some of the detail of the amendments to this legislation today, which seeks to build on and expand the existing role of the Service Complaints Ombudsman. This will allow the new Commissioner to continue to respond and help with specific issues as they do now, but critically enable them to conduct wider inquiries and investigations into issues which affect the general service welfare, including that affecting families, all of which will be critical to the future success of our armed forces. The Commissioner must be free from government interference and present a report to Parliament annually, an event I suspect ministers will not be looking forward to every year, as they are rightly held to account not only by the Commissioner but by all sides of this House and indeed by the public. I want to address some of the amendments that have been proposed this afternoon and why I believe this bill should proceed unamended for what was a very constructive committee stage. Amendment 10, proposed by the member for South Suffolk, seeks to specify further the role of the Commissioner. While I do believe this is well-intentioned, I believe being overly prescriptive on the face of the legislation risks inadvertently compromising the independence of the Commissioner, which is also vital for their success. During the committee stage, I raised exactly this issue with Angela Kitching from the Royal British Legion, who did feel the term general welfare was sufficiently understood in the military, and so I do not believe we should be seeking to be more prescriptive than that. Indeed, it does feel to me as though the proposed amendments 8 and 10, both in the name of the member for South Suffolk, appear contradictory, with Amendment 8 seeking additional measures to cement independence from the government, but Amendment 10 having the effect of diluting that independence by adding on what I feel is unnecessary prescription. In addition, we know the issues the Commissioner will seek to investigate will change and evolve over time, and I do not believe it's helpful to have that level of prescription on the bill for evermore or until amended by primary legislation. Delighted to give on.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think my honourable friend is making an excellent point about both the independence and the need for flexibility, and I really concur with that. Does he agree with me that the recent discovery of very serious problems in service housing might have been better addressed sooner if there had been this sort of independent figure which service families as well as serving members of the armed forces could go to?
Can I thank my honourable friend for that intervention? I think he is absolutely right, and the issues around housing are absolutely critical into how we make sure we are both recruiting and retaining the armed personnel that we will require for the future success that we want our armed forces to have. I'm happy to give it.
Honourable gentleman, indeed to his honourable friend who's just intervened, given their support for improvement in service housing, which has to be one of the principal issues affecting the welfare of serving members of the armed forces at the moment, what's his objection to Amendment 10? I would have thought, given what he has said, he'd be fully supportive of it.
Graeme Downie.
Can I thank my honourable friend for that intervention? I do agree that housing is absolutely one of the issues that the Commissioner will want to look at. I certainly hope that is something to look at in Scotland and across the UK. But I do not believe it's helpful to be prescriptive to them. I believe we must ensure they are fully independent in determining their own priorities, and that we should not seek to place something upon them. Otherwise, what we have is a situation where Parliament is dictating to a Commissioner what they should be doing. And indeed, I believe them and their staff will be more than capable through the appointments process of succeeding in that for themselves. Next, I would like to turn to Amendment 6, proposed by the Honourable Member for Epsom and Ewell, which seeks to impose a timescale on the implementation of the Act. While I, like other members, I'm sure the Minister would want to see the Commissioner begin their new and expanded role as quickly as possible, I believe it is important this is done fully and correctly. During committee stage, I asked Mariette Hughes, the existing Service Complaints Ombudsman, about this point in relation to how staff would cope with the additional powers being transferred. Firstly, it was positive to hear that staff were excited about new powers being proposed, believing them to be necessary, and that is a sign, I believe, in itself that this legislation is both needed and has been framed correctly. On the specific point regarding timescales, Mariette Hughes said, and I quote, "There needs to be a significant scoping period to determine how many staff will be required and what the budget will look like." I believe Amendment 10 seeks to rush that process and, in my view, risks losing the goodwill that currently exists with the Ombudsman's team. I come back again to that point on the importance of independence, and my belief that that culture of independence must start from the beginning without artificial deadlines or criteria imposed. I know the Minister does want to move as quickly as possible on this legislation while ensuring the effectiveness, and I would like to ask him to add to that in his own contribution later on regarding the timescale, but I do not believe an additional amendment will be required. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to turn to a point I raised during second reading and again at committee stage, which is mentioned in the proposed new Clause 2, that of relationships with, with Veterans Commissioners and devolved administrations. As the only Scottish member on the committee scrutinising this bill, you will imagine that ensuring this legislation is effective for my constituents is one of my vital concerns. When I asked Mariette Hughes about this during committee stage, she was incredibly practical and clearly focused on the need to solve problems with devolved administrations rather than taking a heavy-handed approach. The correct approach, in my view. She said she would, and I quote, "work with the devolved administrations, sit round the table and talk about whose job it is to take this forward, because we can all agree this is what needs to happen for people." I also asked a similar point of the Minister at committee, specifically on the role of housing, which we've already been discussing, and I was reassured by his response that, and I quote, "if the Commissioner was looking at housing in a Scottish context, you would expect them to make recommendations to the Scottish Government." That is the kind of constructive scrutiny I would like to see, and feel that proposed new Clause 2 is heavy-handed in its dealing with devolved administrations. And much like the annual report that will be presented to this House, I'm sure MSP colleagues of all political parties, as well as Scottish MPs, will be quick to hold the Scottish Government of any political stripe to account when such recommendations are made to them. New Clause 2 does also not take account of the fact that the powers to tackle issues such as housing does not lie with Veterans Commissioners or even with the Scottish Government, but at a level even closer to communities with local councils. Now, I do know the Honourable Member, the Shadow Minister, abhors central control from a distant place, so I'm sure he will agree with me that seeking to control housing policy in Fife or Moray from London is perhaps not an appropriate power either, and I would urge members to resist New Clause 2. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said at the beginning, the fact this legislation has been brought forward so early by the Government, along with the other positive steps that have been taken to support both armed forces and veterans, shows the commitment of this party and Government to support both. I hope that we can maintain the positive discussions this bill has enjoyed to date, and that we can speak with one voice this evening and pass this legislation without amendment. Thank you.
Marie Rimmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I first of all say how delighted I am to see the introduction of the idea of a Commissioner for our Veterans and Armed Forces. It's badly needed and will, I'm sure, be appreciated and make vast improvements to the welfare of our people there. But more importantly, or as importantly, can I thank the member from Liberal Democrats for putting forward new Clause 1, because there is truly a situation where we have volunteers of strong many years with highly respected and valued members of the full territorial members of the Army. But yet when some apply, they get rejected and do not feel that they're given any explanation as to why they're not acceptable into the armed forces. And I'm reading on your explanation, I think this would answer that. Truly, it's really bad for morale when you don't get told exactly why or given some strong and they can accept that. So thank you so much for that, and I truly welcome this bill at an introduction.
Jacob Collier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise today to lend my full support to the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill, and I will speak shortly to the amendments in the name of the opposition. This bill represents a long overdue step towards supporting the welfare and rights of service personnel and their families. As someone with a brother currently serving in our armed forces, I'm grateful that we have a government that recognises the value of being challenged to deliver better for our service personnel and military families like mine. The bill and the Armed Forces Commissioner is an opportunity to provide independent and robust oversight to ensure that we in this place and all parts of government do right by all who serve. The link between our nation and its armed forces is inseparable. In Burton and Uttoxeter, we have so many military families like my own who feel an immense pride in the service of our loved ones. At a moment's notice, they stand ready to protect our nation and all that we hold dear. Whether it is a soldier posted overseas, a sailor patrolling distant waters, or a pilot protecting our skies, their well-being and that of their families should be at the heart of any government policy. This bill achieves precisely that by establishing an independent Armed Forces Commissioner who can investigate, advocate and hold the system to account. The Commissioner will not just simply respond to complaints, but will proactively examine the issues affecting service life. From housing to healthcare, from transition to civilian life to the schooling of service children, this role will deliver real improvements. And yes, it will challenge this Parliament and this Government, so I hope that the front bench is fully prepared for that. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm mindful of the amendments 9 and 10 brought forward today, and while I must say that their intentions may be laudable, I think that they miss the point. On Amendment 9, this proposes that the Commissioner's remit explicitly includes pensions and death in service benefits for serving and former members of the armed forces. While this might seem fair at first glance, I'm firmly of the view that this amendment is unnecessary and risks undermining the effectiveness of the Commissioner's work. The Commissioner's role, as defined by this bill, is already expansive, covering the full spectrum of welfare concerns for service personnel and their families. This amendment risks narrowing the Commissioner's focus. It could lead to a disproportionate allocation of time and resources to one area, particularly at the expense of other pressing welfare concerns. The Commissioner must have the freedom to determine their priorities based on the evidence that they receive from service personnel, veterans and their families. Their work cannot be restrained by this Parliament prescribing specific areas of focus, no matter how well-meaning. Let's trust that the bill, as drafted, gives the Commissioner the independence they require to do the job effectively. To legislate excessively is to risk diluting the authority and the focus of this legislation, as my honourable friends for Dunfermline and Dollar quite rightly said, and he was bang on the money, if you pardon the pun. Madam Deputy Speaker, similarly, Amendment 10 seeks to explicitly include issues affecting children, family and dependents. While I fully recognise the importance of supporting families of our service personnel, this amendment raises several concerns. The Commissioner's role is already designed to advocate for the welfare of service families comprehensively. There is no doubt that issues like education allowances, special needs tuition and housing fall squarely within that remit. The Commissioner must have the flexibility to address the full spectrum of welfare issues and not be bound by a rigid checklist dictated by this House. We must trust that the Commissioner will engage with service families effectively without Parliament micromanaging their work. I'm sure that all of us in this House have topics that we would want the Commissioner to focus on, but the point is, it's not up to us. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill represents progress, a move towards ensuring that our military personnel and their families feel heard, valued and supported. It sends a clear message that their voice matters, their welfare matters, and their service to our country is not taken for granted. We on these benches have consistently supported measures that champion the rights and well-being of all those who serve. The Armed Forces Commissioner Bill aligns with those values, and I urge colleagues to wholeheartedly support it tonight.
Phil Brickell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to speak in support of the bill today. I came into politics to improve people's lives, and I believe the introduction of an Armed Forces Commissioner will do just this by providing a voice to members of our Armed Forces community which have been ignored for far too long. And as the Prime Minister said during the King's Speech debate last year, this is not just a name or a role. It is a way in which we can show our respect for those who have committed their lives to the ultimate service. Indeed, my own father served as a gunner in the Royal Artillery, taking him to Northern Ireland, to Germany, to Cyprus and to Canada. So I have some idea of the sacrifice made by servicemen and women and their families. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is yet another instance of this government delivering on its promises, and we made a manifesto commitment to strengthen support for our Armed Forces personnel and the families who support them by establishing an independent Armed Forces Commissioner, and here we are now getting on with it. The simple fact is, as others have alluded to, is that the current system is broken after 14 years of the party opposite regrettably burying their heads in the sand. No one should have to live in damp housing and have to use food banks to get by, least of all the families of our brave armed forces. And we know that, sadly, only 4 in 10 service personnel say they are satisfied with service life in general. We will all be conscious of shocking reports on the experiences of female personnel in particular over recent years, which are totally unacceptable. So I was reassured to see the former member for Wrexham, who chaired a Defence Committee inquiry into women in the armed forces, express her support for the bill. I would like to echo, yes, I will.
Right, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Amendment 2, in the name of my honourable friend, the member for Epsom, would ensure that the Commissioner publishes annual reports to outline what is being done to support minority groups in the armed forces. So, does the honourable gentleman agree with me that this amendment would ensure the Commissioner is an important tool to help the armed forces achieve the target for women to account for 30% of personnel recruited by 2030?
Brickell.
Well, I thank the honourable member for her contribution. I will not be supporting that particular clause today. I hope that we will be able to pass the bill unamended, and I will defer to the Minister to address the question directly, but I want to echo the sentiments of the member for Dunfermline and Dollar about the independence of the Commissioner and particularly his comments on Amendment 6. Madam Deputy Speaker, we live in a dangerous world, so I think that when it comes to the men and women who are tasked with keeping us safe, we must ensure that we return to them the favour of making sure they're treated with respect. But we should not delude ourselves by seeing the Armed Forces Commissioner as a silver bullet. I would like to welcome this government's commitment to a new strengthened Armed Forces Covenant, which would enshrine in law the respect due to members and former members of our military. As I think many members of this House know, the military estate, its houses, barracks and other facilities are in an appalling condition and frankly unfit to house many of our servicemen and women and their families. And I welcome measures from the government to conduct a medium to long-term review, but would simply urge ministers not to kick the can down the road on an issue which has persisted for far, far too long. Financial well-being, gaps in medical discharge processes, mental health support failures, there is a lot to do, but the initial signs are good. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, as Secretary of the Germany APPG and someone with a number of family members in Germany, I would like to note that this position has been modelled on the long-established and successful German counterpart, as the gallant member for Spelthorne quite rightly mentioned earlier. It's refreshing to see a government seeking to improve life in the UK by drawing inspiration from successful policies from our closest allies in Europe, and I sincerely hope we can pass the bill today to provide the support our military personnel and their families so urgently deserve.
Kelvin Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Armed Forces Commissioner Bill stands as a critical piece of legislation that will establish an independent champion for our servicemen and women as well as their families. This bill fulfils a manifesto commitment and represents a significant step forward in renewing our nation's contract with those who serve us. So it's positive to see a continued and rapid progression into law. Today, our opposition colleagues have brought a number of amendments forward, and I want to speak to several of these in turn. On new clause 1, the government is implementing measures to address our current challenges with recruitment and retention. Expanding the Commissioner's scope to include all applicants could overwhelm the office and detract from its core mission of supporting current service personnel and their families. The previous Conservative government hollowed out and underfunded our armed forces. Morale in the military is at record low, and we are facing a recruitment and retention crisis. Many of those who want to join our armed forces wait far too long, and the government is committed to fixing this through measures being rolled out, such as the new 10/30 provision. So within 10 days from application, you will be given a provisional offer to join the armed forces, and 30 days from that point of application, you will be given a provisional start date. I will.
Lincoln Jopp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for giving way. I think I'm right in saying he described morale as being at an all-time low. Last week, I, with a number of other colleagues from the Defence Select Committee, had the opportunity, with the honourable member, to visit RAF Lossiemouth, where we saw a range of service personnel at the top of their game. And I would be intrigued to know whether the honourable member would characterise their morale as being at an all-time low, or whether he thinks that the election of a Labour government in July has had the rapid effect that maybe he would ascribe to it.
Well, I thank my right honourable and gallant, the right honourable and gallant member. Oh, sorry, the honourable and gallant member for his take your pick. For his intervention, and he is indeed correct that we did visit a service station, RF Lossiemouth, last week, and we saw people at the top of their game doing what service people do, which is cope, do their job and put a brave face on things. The continuing attitude survey shows that behind those things there is stress, and that the service that they are enduring to some degree could be made better. And therefore, whilst when we see service people, they will put a good face on their morale, that is not to say that our services are in the buoyant state that they could be. I will.
I thank my honourable and gallant friend for giving way. Would he not agree that there's a very easy way to measure the state of morale, which is retention rates, and that we're not recruiting and retaining armed forces personnel to the degree that we would wish, and part of the motivation for introducing this bill to tackle general service welfare issues, and I'm making sure I use the correct language about what the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill, Armed Forces Commissioner role covers, is to have an operational impact by ensuring that it's easier to recruit people to the armed forces, and then that when we train them at great expense, that we retain them for the longest possible length of viable service.
Absolutely. I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I agree with him entirely. Look, we don't expect our service personnel to stand up and tell us their problems openly. That's part of what makes them resilient. What we need to do, and what's important about having an Armed Forces Commissioner, is that we have someone that can see through that, and the gallant members within this House will be able to see through those things, and it'd be wrong to politic with what people present of themselves to us when we go and visit them, rather than what we would like to make known for political gains. You know, the truth is, as the last member as my honourable friend just made perfectly clear, is that we aren't doing a very good job at recruiting and retaining. And the reason for the objection against Clause 1 is that it is important that we go specifically after the needs that will enable us to have a better recruitment process and will help us to retain our people going forward, because that is where we are failing, and perhaps is why the gallant member who raised the point is in the House as a Member of Parliament and not continuing in his illustrious career, which came before his time in this place. The Government has also introduced a new cyber pathway to bring being the best and brightest into our armed forces and rebuild our defences for the future, particularly given the grey zone threats from Russia that we heard evidence on in the Select Committee this morning. This is also positive. However, there are approximately 150,000 applicants attempting to join the military at any one time. If all of these individuals were brought under the scope of the Commissioner, as would happen if the new clause were brought to pass, it would vastly increase the workload and ultimately impact the efficiency and effectiveness of the Commissioner. Fundamentally, honourable members opposite are attempting to address a genuine problem with this amendment, but in practice I share concerns that it could mean that service personnel and their families would not get the attention they rightly need. On new Clause 2, while the Armed Forces Commissioner's role is focused on serving personnel, the Government is implementing a broader strategy of support to the entire Armed Forces community, including veterans through various initiatives and legal protections. All veterans, including those who are sat on the opposition's benches, make an important contribution to our communities and our armed forces. However, the Armed Forces Commissioner's remit is purposefully defined narrowly to focus on issues currently impacting service personnel and their families. This allows the Commissioner to effectively address immediate concerns facing those in uniform, including some of those that concern me most and most seriously affect retention for women and people of ethnic minorities, such as bullying and harassment. This bill is just one step in Labour's plan to renew the nation's contract to those with those who have served and their families. Our Government is committed to strengthening support for the entire Armed Forces community, recognising that veteran support is a distinct issue from this bill. The Government are working to fully incorporate the Armed Forces Covenant into law, ensuring fairness and respect for veterans and their families. Some of our recent initiatives, including a £75 million LGBT financial recognition scheme, is acknowledging historic wrongs experienced by our LGBT veterans, making the Veterans Card an accepted form of voter ID, crucial for mobile service members, as I know from my own experience, committing £3.5 million of veteran homelessness support, including wraparound service for at-risk veterans. While the Armed Forces Commissioner primarily deals with those affected by service law, they have the discretion to invite opinions from a broader range of stakeholders, including veterans, when conducting investigations. I personally would expect that this power the power the Commissioner will use regularly, because honourable members opposite are right that this is a critical part of their role. I would hope that members opposite will recognise that the flexibility in this bill is important. It allows the Commissioner to gather comprehensive insights as in the exercise of their duties, but doesn't limit their independence or freedom to lead by narrowing their focus. On Amendment 7, the Armed Forces Commissioner's role, while focused on serving personnel, complements the broader Armed Forces Covenant and existing legislation to support the entire military community. The Armed Forces Covenant recognises the unique obligations and sacrifices made by those who served in the armed forces, whether regular or reserve, as well as veterans in their families. Our Government is fully committed to this covenant, and with our election manifesto pledge to put this into place fully into law, while the Armed Forces Commissioner's role primarily focuses on serving community and their families, They will undoubtedly consider covenant issues related to active service members and their families as part of general service welfare matters outlined in the bill. This aligns with the Commissioner's function to promote the welfare of service persons and their families and to improve public understanding of these issues. It's important to note that this bill is not standalone legislation. Rather, it amends part of the Armed Forces Act of 2006, which already includes Part 16A addressing the Armed Forces Covenant. Therefore, Amendment 7 is not necessary. By integrating the Commissioner's role into the existing framework, we ensure a comprehensive approach to supporting both current and former members of the armed forces, reinforcing our commitment to the entire military community. On Amendment 8, the amendment would require the Commissioner to be independent from the government, the armed forces and their interference in carrying out their duties. In response to Amendment 8, this bill provides greater independence and scrutiny for those upholding the welfare of armed forces personnel. I welcome that role, and it will be subjected to a full public appointment process and scrutiny by the Defence Select Committee, as mentioned earlier by the Chair of the Defence Select Committee. The Commissioner will be established as a corporation sole and will thus be independent of the Ministry of Defence, which is clearly important to give them the ability to hold account effectively. The Commissioner will have the discretion over what they investigate and the power to proactively launch investigations. These provisions mean that the Commissioner will stay focused on general service welfare matters and would be expected to have regular meetings with the chain of command. But I fully agree that independence for the chain of command is vital. As a member of the Defence Select Committee, I had the opportunity to question the service's complaint ombudsman last week, and a point I raised, and I know many members of the armed forces have raised this with me since, is around the independence of the current complaints process from the chain of command. I would like to ask the Minister for clarification on how the Commissioner will close this gap and the gaps that allow for abuses by commanding officers. I really want to emphasise how important a shift the new powers and independence of the Commissioner will be. This will mark a significant improvement over the current Ombudsman's limited scope. The Commissioner will retain the independence to make arrangements of their office. They will also be able to decide how to spend their money and which issues they choose to investigate. Currently, the Service Complaints Ombudsman only has the power to investigate formal service complaints, something she stressed last week. However, the current defence guidance encourages informal complaint resolutions at the lowest level. In my view, this emphasis can be inappropriate when dealing with complaints like harassment and discrimination. Abusers can survive an informal resolution and move on to continue their abuse elsewhere. While
I thank the honourable and gallant member for giving way. He referred to the Armed Forces Complaints Ombudsman coming and giving evidence to the Defence Committee last week with her report from 2023, which detailed that there were 3 complaints made against the Ombudsman organisation itself. Was the honourable member as dismayed as I was that the Armed Forces Complaints Ombudsman was not able to recall the details of the 1 complaint of those 3 that was upheld against the Commissioner? I beg pardon, against the Ombudsman.
I thank the honourable and gallant member for his intervention. The service the Ombudsman who came to speak to us the other day gave a very clear account of the challenges and issues that she faced and elucidated on a number of challenges over addressing the specificity of any individual complaints that they had been made aware of due to the distance between the complaint and her appearance at the committee. And therefore, I think it's worth going back to and reviewing the entirety of her evidence, because for me it did nothing more than emphasise the need for this bill to be passed in the way that it has been presented, and to take hold and to take note of the challenges to the amendments that I am making presently. I would like to ask the Minister, I may have gone back, on the wider status of service complaint system. Efforts to enhance consistency and accessibility are ongoing. I'd like to take this moment to thank the current Ombudsman, Marietta Hughes, and her team for the work they have done to improve the service complaint system. It was clear from her responses to our questions last week that she was very conscious of the need to continue improving the system throughout the transition to a new Commissioner. I'm sure that the Ministry will continue its work to implement the recommendations of her office, particularly in ensuring that there are a single entry point for complaints and a consistent approach in the recording of all the grievances across defence as laid down in successive annual reports. Turning to Amendment 6, the Government is committed to swiftly establishing the Armed Forces Commissioner through a rigorous appointment process, ensuring that the role is filled by a highly qualified and security-cleared individual to effectively advocate for the armed forces community. While the bill does not detail a specific implementation timetable, which colleagues will know is typical of primary legislation, this is a priority for the Government. I believe colleagues from all sides will recognise that the appointment process must be done correctly. The appointment will be subject to a full public appointments process, regulated and overseen by the Office of the Commissioner for Public Appointments. This process will include necessary vetting and security clearances, building trust among armed forces personnel that the implementation timeline will also account for the passing of the secondary legislation and a smooth transition from the current service complaints Ombudsman to the new Commissioner's office.
Does the member require a moment? Are you happy to continue? Wonderful.
Madam Deputy Speaker. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the creation of an Armed Forces Commissioner will provide a powerful voice for service personnel and their families, ensuring their concerns are heard and addressed at the highest levels. As we move forward with this bill, we must remain vigilant in our efforts to improve service life, address systemic issues and uphold the highest standards of behaviour within our military. The success of the new role demands and depends on our continued support and scrutiny. I look forward to seeing the positive impact that this bill will have on the lives who serve our nation.
Yeah. Substantial contribution there. I call the Shadow Minister, Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We began at the second reading of this bill by announcing our aim was to be a critical friend regarding the bill, and that remains our aim today, although I fear at one point we may become very critical. But can I begin in a bipartisan spirit by pointing out that even though we are here today to debate the extremely important matter of the welfare of our armed forces, so far at least, as pointed out by a Labour member opposite, I don't think the SNP have made a single contribution to this discussion, and nor, for the record, have Reform. We debated, and I think in both cases that is a shame. We debated this bill in committee back in December, and following that, I should now like to speak to our amendments 8, 9, 10 and 11, plus new clause 2 in my name and that of my honourable friend, the member for South Suffolk, who is in his place, beginning with Amendment 8. On that, may I start by commending the Chairman of the Select Committee for his speech. For the record, Madam Deputy Speaker, he's having a good run at the moment. He's had 3 Select Committee reports that he's been allowed to make statements on, and the committee have only been up and running for a few weeks, so that is a very fast start. I'll be relatively brief in my remarks on this amendment because we cover this in some detail in committee, and also because my honourable and gallant friend from Spelthorne, as a former commanding officer of the Scots Guards, made some incisive points about the amendment, not least in relation to the interaction between the proposed Armed Forces Commissioner and the chain of command, a point that was also touched on by the honourable and gallant member for Leighton and Wanstead before he was inexplicably distracted. Suffice to say for now that it was mentioned numerous times across all sides of the committee that in addition to demonstrating their independence, the Armed Forces Commissioner would have to work hard to win the trust of Armed Forces personnel and their families regarding this new role. Indeed, during the public evidence session, General Sir Andrew Gregory, the Comptroller of SAFA, made the very constructive suggestion that the Commissioner would need to undertake a lot of visits to Armed Forces locations and meet with both personnel and their families as part of that trust-building process. When I was an MOD Minister, I tried to make a lot of visits too, so I can well understand the merits of the general suggestion with regards to the proposed new Commissioner. According to the Government's timetable, the new Armed Forces Commissioner is currently likely to be up and running sometime in 2026, so whoever takes up this post, I hope they might be minded to listen to General Gregory's sage advice. Turning now to Amendment 9, Madam Deputy Speaker. We did raise this topic of pensions and death in service benefits in committee, as I shall come on to explain in a moment, but this was an issue we were determined to raise again at the report stage of the bill, not least as it is both important and unresolved. In speaking to this, I'd like to look at one aspect of military pensions and then at death in service benefits specifically. It's an interesting point that we lack some important statistics about military veterans who leave the armed forces and then draw their service pension. For instance, we have an Armed Forces Continuous Attitude Survey, AFCAS, an annual exercise to tell us the attitudes of armed forces personnel on everything from housing repairs to overseas deployments. Similarly, we have a Reserve Continuous Attitude Survey, or RESCAS, to ask questions about the opinions of our much-valued reserves, and we also have a Families Continuous Attitude Survey, or FAMCAS, to seek the views of service families. However, there's no official Veterans Continuous Attitude Survey, no VETSCAS, as it were, to tell us the opinions of veterans. However, there are a number of veterans' charities who do gather data in this area outside of the direct responsibility of the Ministry of Defence. I recently tabled a written parliamentary question to MOD ministers about their estimate of the number of veterans who would be affected by the recent decision to seriously restrict availability for the winter fuel allowance. The response that came back from the department around a fortnight or so was, in essence, that they didn't have the data on this. I'd humbly suggest that someone needs to try and collate this as soon as possible, because I'm not sure the public would be pleased to learn that many veterans, although we cannot say precisely how many, could lose their winter fuel allowance as a result of the Chancellor's budget. Indeed, the Royal British Legion, who do know a thing or two about veterans, has also expressed concern that the government has, as they put it, not identified how this policy change will impact older veterans. Indeed, an RBL spokesman recently went on to say, and I quote them, "A large number of older people have served in the UK Armed Forces, many of whom face additional heating costs due to care and responsibilities or disability." In a moment, please don't interrupt the Royal British Legion. The government needs to understand the impact of their policy on veterans in order to better support those affected. I'll gladly give way.
Thank you to the Shadow Minister for giving way. And while I'm very much enjoying, as I always do, his interventions in the dispatch box, I think he's discussing an issue which is definitely not within the scope of this bill, and perhaps better to move on to the hopefully cross-party consensus we can come back to concerning over this bill itself. Thank you.
Well, firstly, I would say that's a matter for the Chair, and secondly, if the amendment was not in order, I presume it would not have been selected. But this is not Treasury questions, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I don't propose to reprise the whole debate about the winter fuel allowance in order to save honourable members opposite's agony. Nevertheless, I hope the Minister's taken the point on board, and perhaps when he winds up the debate, he could say something, anything, about how many veterans the government think are likely to be affected by this restriction of winter fuel allowance, and whether he thinks that's the right thing to do, not least in the spirit of the Armed Forces Covenant. Turning now to the specific matter of death in service benefits, a topic which, as the honourable gentleman opposite will remember, we raised at the committee stage last month. As ably pointed out by the Armed Forces Pension Society, which I hope the House will accept is very much the gold standard organisation on any matter relating to armed forces pensions, the clue is in the name, there is a problem which has arisen because of the government's proposed changes to inheritance tax as announced by the Chancellor in her budget of the 30th of October. In essence, in a situation where a member of the armed forces who is in a long-term relationship, perhaps even with children, but who is not married, were to die whilst in service, which does not necessarily mean on active operations, the death in service benefit which they would normally be entitled to might, under the government's proposed changes, become liable for inheritance tax. As I explained in the committee, to take an example of how this might affect a senior non-commissioned officer, if we look at an OR9 rank equivalent, a senior warrant officer at the top of the non-commissioned officer rank structure, this individual has a partner to whom they are unmarried and on death leaves an estate worth £400,000 and death in service benefits of £248,292, 4 times their £62,000 salary. They would pay 40% inheritance tax on the non-pension assets, resulting in an IHT liability of £30,000. But after April 2027, if the death in service benefits were included in the estate, that will increase the estate's value to £648,292. The IHT liability will therefore increase accordingly to £129,316. That represents an increase of around a staggering 330%. The comment from the Armed Forces Pension Society in a briefing they prepared on this issue explained this worrisome problem in the following terms, and I quote from the briefing. At a time of extreme vulnerability, these lump sums need to be paid promptly, as they currently are. If death in service benefits become service to IHT, there will be a delay to the benefit being paid, both while the estate is assessed for IHT and while the amount of IHT attributable to the death in service benefit is assessed and the scheme administrator, in this case Veterans UK, pays the tax charge. As the Armed Forces Pension Society then elucidates, and I quote them again, many who had not previously been caught with an IHT liability and find themselves in a very bureaucratic process that will slow down the already lengthy process of sorting out the financial affairs of an individual at what is a very difficult time. I should say, in fairness, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Armed Forces Pension Society have suggested that the government have made an error and would not knowingly implement a policy that runs so contrary to the spirit of the Armed Forces Covenants. When I finish this point, yes. They point out that the system is recoverable because the changes are subject to a consultation and are not currently due to come in until April 2027. Nevertheless, this is still a potentially worrying situation, especially for armed forces families with parents in a committed relationship and multiple children, but who, for whatever reason, have not decided to marry. We were prepared to give the Minister the benefit of the doubt about this in committee. Indeed, when I raised it, without wishing to be uncharitable, he did seem to be slightly taken aback by the problem. I say this because my suspicion is that when the Treasury came up with this, the Ministry of Defence were blissfully unaware of it. I'm therefore suggesting that MOD ministers may not be directly at fault, but nevertheless it's their personnel and their families who may be affected. Towards the conclusion of the committee, I strongly suggested to the Armed Forces Minister he should take this away in discussions with the Treasury, as there will be a consultation exercise on these changes before they come into force in financial year 26-27, and thus there would be an opportunity to change the policy and avert the problem. Indeed, the Armed Forces Pension Society's response to the consultation, which I have here in a moment, calls on them to do just that. However, having given the Minister what I believe was fair notice in committee, I raised the topic with him again at the last session of Oral Defence Questions on the 6th of January, in fairness, the first day on which the Commons returned from the Christmas recess. When I asked the Minister what the government had done about it, unfortunately he didn't deliver a particularly convincing reply. I give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, but he's citing a specific example under which the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill would have to oversee. This is not relevant to the discussion about the bill or about the amendments. I mean, will he bring up any of the other myriad of exceptional circumstances that have caused pain and suffering for our service personnel that your leadership under 14 years of the previous government
refers to me, and it is up to the Chair to decide, to determine what is in scope, and just for other colleagues, it is up to the lead speaker to accept or decline an intervention. Do you have further to give, Mr Bailey, or shall I return to the Shadow Minister?
Thank you, Madam Deputy.
Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. But just a second, I've just got to reply to this one yet. Forgive me. Again, if this were not in order, we would have been told so by now. I mean, maybe one day, after many years of distinguished service, the honourable gentleman will become a Deputy Speaker of this House. But not today. So, if I could continue, and then I'll take this other intervention. We really do need to do something about this. As the Armed Forces Pension Society have already pointed out, it would be totally contrary to the principles of the Armed Forces Covenant, including the one that armed forces personnel and their families should suffer no disadvantage as a result of their service to the Crown if this were to go unanswered and unmarried service widows and their families were to be punished in this way. I thank the gentleman for being patient.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He has raised some very interesting specific policy issues that are clearly of concern to large numbers of people receiving armed forces pensions. But the bill makes clear, and ministers have been very clear throughout consideration of the bill so far, that the independent commissioner will decide for themselves what is a general service welfare matter, and therefore whether they want to look into the issues being raised in both Amendments 9 and 10. So I'm seeking to ask whether the right honourable gentleman will explain the apparent contradiction between opposition members insisting in Amendment 8 that they want reassurance about the independence of the Commissioner, and then wanting to try to predetermine the very specific topics that the Commissioner would investigate through their Amendments 9 and 10.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. As at the report stage, we're trying to amend the bill if we think it could be improved. And just because we had the bill as originally produced at first reading doesn't mean it can't be improved. That's what, if I may humbly say so, the report stage is actually about. Now, this is pressing, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I say this particularly to the honourable gentleman, as the consultation on this closes tomorrow. The Veterans Minister replied to me on this subject, hey presto, just this morning. I quote from his letter, which I have here. I would seek to reassure the right honourable gentleman that an existing exemption in inheritance tax legislation means that active members who die as a result of their service are exempt from inheritance tax provisions. However, this only applies to those killed whilst on active service. It does not apply to those who are still in the service of the Crown but die of natural causes. So I'm afraid the Veterans Minister's reply is really smoke and mirrors, and it deliberately ducks the issue of those who die of natural causes while still in service with living dependents. The government's already upset farmers and business owners with their proposed inheritance tax changes. Surely they don't want to upset service families as well. So I should say to the Minister, if at what is now the third time of asking, we don't receive a satisfactory reply this afternoon, we'll be strongly minded to press this amendment, Madam Deputy Speaker, in order to hold ministers to account and to try and achieve positive change. So with the consultation closing tomorrow, I'll listen very carefully to what the Minister says in his response to this issue, but having given him 2 previous bites at the cherry on this, I'm afraid we may be likely to press this if, on behalf of those service families who may be affected, we do not receive a satisfactory reply. Turning now to Amendment 10, Madam Deputy Speaker. As you can see, it covers 3 topics, namely the operation of Continuity of Education Allowance, or CEA as it's known. Secondly, the provision of special educational needs tuition for the children of Armed Forces personnel. And thirdly, the maintenance of the service families' accommodation. Perhaps I could take the matters in return and in reversal. On service families accommodation, I welcomed in committee the recent announcement that the government intend to effectively buy back service family accommodation from Annington Homes. I know that my honourable friend, the member for South Suffolk, also welcomes these proposals because, as ministers, to be fair to them, have already acknowledged on the floor of the House, whilst in government, my honourable friend spent a great deal of time working on this scheme, so he's understandably very pleased to see those efforts come to fruition, albeit under a government of a different colour, as indeed am I. We should give credit where it's due. Service housing was mentioned multiple times during the committee stage of the bill, and there seems to be little doubt that it qualifies as a general service welfare matter. But I've included the topic in this amendment to facilitate a brief discussion on the potential actual management and maintenance of service housing post-Annington, as it were, and during the time frame in which the new Armed Forces Commissioner is likely to be in operation. The fact that MOD will in effect recover the freehold of its properties and be the landlord opens up exciting opportunities to change the maintenance of service family accommodation, and indeed potentially for single living accommodation or SLA as well. The Minister will be aware that as a former Minister, I was commissioned by a former Prime Minister to write 2 reports, one on Armed Forces recruitment, which was subtly entitled Filling the Ranks, delivered in 2017, and as a result of the first report, a second one on retention entitled Stick or Twist, delivered in February 2020, barely a month before the nation went into lockdown because of COVID. I know that some MOD ministers have kindly taken the time and trouble to look at these reports, so I shan't attempt to repeat their contents here, other than to make one specific point on the management of SFA. Having looked at this in detail, my team concluded very strongly there must be a better way for managing service housing than what is now the current contract, the Future Defence Infrastructure System, or FDIS for short. Our alternative, which I believe now would have new resonance as the homes are transferred from Annington back to the MOD, would be to form a dedicated Forces Housing Association, or FHA, the fundamental purpose of which would be to provide high-quality, well-maintained accommodation for service personnel and their families at an affordable cost. So I think the Minister's kindly read this report, as has the Veterans Minister, who has responsibility for it, and I hope he will take that on board. We debated SEN in some detail in committee, so I don't propose to repeat all of that again now, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I refer the Minister to a recent PAC report that was published last week on the topic. Moving on to continuity of education allowance. This is a very important issue, particularly as it affects retention. The VAT increase of 20% will affect around 4,200 children of surface personnel, but the MOD are only increasing the CA cap by 12.5% for senior school students and 16.6% for junior school students. That leaves their parents to make up the difference from their post-tax income. Now, this situation has already come into effect from the 1st of January, so about 3 weeks ago today. And as a joint briefing note from the Independent Schools Council and the Boarding Schools Association point out, the VAT will cover both the tuition fees and boarding accommodation at independent boarding schools. In the worst cases, VAT will have an adverse impact for military families using CEA, who could see their contributions increase by over 50% for senior school pupils. The Treasury's VAT consultation said about this they would, I quote, monitor closely the impact of these policy changes on affected military and diplomatic families, with the upcoming spending review being the right time to consider any changes to the scheme. Madam Deputy Speaker. However, the spending review will not... Forgive me, Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe we have until 6 o'clock. However, the spending review will not report until the summer of this year. But military families are having to pay the increased costs now. I have a whole range of quotes that I could read into the record.
Mr Ponsford.
Oh.
It's best you don't read out all the quotes and come to your conclusion.
Yes, ma'am. I won't read them out, ma'am. But the point is this: in terms of retention, this is not just an officer's benefit, it's a very important benefit for senior NCOs. And if these costs become unsustainable, there's a risk that they'll leave the armed forces. And if they do, someone who may have cost the Crown over £1 million to train will then leave. So it's very much a false economy to do that. Lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, turning to our new Clause 2, we had a considerable debate in committee about the relationship between the Armed Forces Commissioner and the various Veterans Commissioners, a point which has already been touched on by our friends from Northern Ireland. And I want to, in concluding, place on the record, my admiration for the previous Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner, Mr Downie, an ex-serviceman himself, who was widely respected across the sectarian and political divide in Northern Ireland. It's a great shame that he resigned, but I wish his... briefly, yes.
Briefly, I thank the honourable member for giving way. Northern Ireland has possibly more veterans per head of population than any other constituent part of the United Kingdom. Thousands served in the Ulster Defence Regiment and the Royal Irish Regiment alongside British Army regiments during their tours of Northern Ireland. Would he agree with me and commend the new Veterans Commissioner, Mr David Johnson, who has also served with distinction? And would he agree with the calls from the member of South Antrim or North Antrim today that this should be a fully funded and full-time post in Northern Ireland, given the needs of veterans in Northern Ireland?
I wish the new Veterans Commissioner of Northern Ireland all the best. But I'll just suffice to say he has a hard act to follow. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, we hope that we have been a critical friend to the bill. We've pressed the government on the issue of death in service benefits. We've pressed the government on continuity of education allowance and its implications for retention. And if we don't receive what I hope may yet be satisfactory answers from the Minister, we may be minded to press both of those amendments.
I call the Minister, Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank all honourable members who have spoken in this debate today and all those who served on the Public Bill Committee. This bill is a landmark step to fulfil this government's commitment to renew the nation's contract with those who serve by strengthening support for our armed forces and their families who stand behind them. At a time when, as a nation, our forces are facing a crisis in recruitment and retention and morale that this government inherited from the party opposite after 14 years, where only 4 in 10 of our service personnel report being satisfied with service life, we need this bill to establish a champion who can shine a light on the general service welfare matters most affecting our people so we can in this House understand those issues and hold this government and future governments to account. I'll turn to each of the amendments proposed in this debate. New Clause 1, in the name of the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, seeks to bring those going through the recruitment process into the Commissioner's remit. We did inherit a retention and recruitment crisis. It is for that reason that the Secretary of State early doors in his tenure laid out a number of policies to improve our recruitment policy. The 10-30 policy, as so ably set out by my friend from Leighton and Wanstead, is one of those such things. A provisional offer within 10 days of an application to our armed forces and a provisional start date within 30 days is a substantial step forward for those people joining our armed forces. 84% of people who seek to join our armed forces drop out of the process because it takes too long. That is an utter scandal that this government is determined to address. It is for that reason that the 10-30 policy was put in place. It's for that reason that myself, the Defence Secretary and the Minister for Veterans and People have been so focused on improving our retention and recruitment policies. But it is also the reason why I have to resist her amendment, because the focus of this bill is on those people who serve and their families. They have been neglected for far too long, and that is why this bill is relentlessly and unapologetically focused at providing an independent champion for them and their families. And so I understand why she seeks to include recruits in the scope of the bill. There'll be 150,000 candidates every single year that will be added to the Commissioner's workforce. Our job as a government is to convert more of those people who apply to serve in our military, to make it easier to do so. The new lateral entry into the cyber work announced by the Defence Secretary is a really good example of that. But the focus of this should remain on those people who serve and their families. New Clause 2 on veterans in the name of the Shadow Defence Secretary is about ensuring decent engagement with Veterans Commissioners across the country and the Chief Commissioner of the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery. The manifesto commitment that this bill delivers was clear in its aim to address the gap in support to military personnel. It is for the Commissioner to highlight the issues affecting personnel today, not matters from the past. I understand why he's tabled that amendment, and on this side of the House, with our new Veterans Minister, we've made very clear that our intention to improve the support that we offer veterans, but this Commissioner's role is to support service personnel and their families. It is also the independent role of the Commissioner to decide which general service welfare matters that they should investigate. It is that freedom and that independence that is so vital to this role, and it is for that reason that it is important that we keep that freedom for the Commissioner to decide who to engage with. I would expect, however, just to reassure him, that once the Commissioner is established, the terms of reference of engagement with a variety of organisations from the charitable sector, military charity sector, including those people who represent veterans and the Veterans Commissioners across the UK, would be established. So I think the effect of what he is seeking to do would already be provided in the way we would implement this bill. As such, I think this amendment he is proposing is unnecessary. Amendment 7 on the Covenant, I think, is well-intentioned as well. It is important to realise that this bill is not a standalone bill. This bill seeks to amend the Armed Forces Act of 2006, and as part of that, Part 16A of the Armed Forces Act deals with the Covenant. So when the Honourable Lady looks to make the Covenant apply to the Armed Forces Commissioner, I can reassure her that as this bill inserts the Armed Forces Commissioner into the Armed Forces Act, it would already grip in that respect. And I can further reassure her that as to deliver our manifesto commitment to put the Armed Forces Covenant fully into law, we'll be bringing forward proposals as part of the Armed Forces Bill, which will be brought forward by this government later in this Parliament. So again, I feel that is an unnecessary amendment, but I understand and entirely appreciate why she wants to bring that forwards, and I hope that all of us can lend our support for the further implementation of the Armed Forces Covenant, so it grips not just on local but central government as well. On Amendment 8 on independence, I hope there's no doubt that the intention for the Commissioner to act as an independent champion for our armed forces and hold this and future governments to account is clear in the legislation and from the commitments the Defence Secretary and myself have made from this dispatch box. I therefore generally welcome the principle of Amendment 8, We discussed it in detail at committee. A number of provisions are already in the bill to ensure the Commissioner is able to conduct their inquiries and work separately from the functions of government. These include their discretion over the matters they investigate, their reporting powers, their powers of entry to defence sites to carry out their functions, without notice in some circumstances, and an obligation on the Secretary of State to cooperate with the Commissioner. Many of these arrangements will be transferred from the existing functions of the Service Complaints Ombudsman. The Ombudsman has highlighted in her evidence that she feels a strong degree of independence from the MOD on decision-making already, and that matters, and I have echoed it in this bill. There are important circumstances where it's critical that the Commissioner cannot act purely on their own initiative. I'm referring to the Secretary of State restricting access to sites where there is a valid national security or safety reason to do so. To have a legal power for the Commission to act without influence or interference would make that impossible, and certainly in previous conversations with the opposition, they've been very keen to make sure that there is a suitable level of qualification on access to secret and very sensitive sites, and I believe that the amendment would actually go against the argument the opposition was made elsewhere. So I hope on that circumstance he would not be pressing that to a vote. I thank the House for their views on Amendments 5 and 6 from the Liberal Democrats in relation to the appointment of the Commissioner. It is our intention that the Commissioner is in place in 2026. That is the reason why there has been not only second reading, a full committee stage, but now report stage happening so soon into this new government, because we want to see this put in place as soon as we can. Our intention to have the operation up and running in 2026 remains in place. Can I just briefly relate to the questions from my honourable friend from Slough in relation to the work of the House of Commons Defence Select Committee? We expect robust scrutiny of any candidate that the Secretary of State puts forward for this role. We expect it to be above and beyond in terms of the relationship that the Commissioner has with the House of Commons Defence Select Committee, because when the Commissioner publishes a report, it is the intention of this bill that that report does not get published to the Ministry of Defence to decide what to do with it, with the exception of a national security scrub, that I'm certain every member in this House will understand why. That report will then go to Parliament and indeed to the House of Commons Defence Select Committee. So in that respect, the relationship between the Commissioner and the Defence Select Committee will be more enhanced than perhaps the relationship between the Service Complaints Ombudsman and the current committee system sets up. In relation to the question around the robust decision that the committee will make, the Honourable Gentleman may be familiar with the bill. In Schedule 1, Paragraph 7, page 9 of the bill, it includes powers for the Secretary of State to appoint interim roles should the full appointment process be not complete at that point. So unlike with the powers afforded to the current Service Complaints Ombudsman, where if there is a vacancy in that office, the ability of that organisation to function is greatly restricted, we've learned from that and provided powers to ensure that the work of the Armed Forces Commissioner can continue in the absence of a permanent Armed Forces Commissioner being in place. And I hope on that basis that will satisfy him in relation to those questions. I'm eager for the Commissioner to be established and for their office to be operational as soon as practically possible. In relation to Amendment 3 on funding, the bill has been designed to ensure the Commissioner has the tools, funding and support they need now and in the future. The Secretary of State has an obligation in the bill to give the Commissioner any reasonable assistance they request to conduct their work effectively. Should the Commissioner feel that their funding, estimated to be in the region of £5 million on an annual basis, was insufficient, they can raise this in their annual reports as part of their mechanism to provide additional scrutiny to Parliament. In relation to the pensions, family definition that the Honourable Lady mentions, she'll be familiar that we've committed to set out the definition of family members in secondary legislation to enable that to be updated if necessary as things happen. Families come in all different shapes and sizes. And it is important when trying to define that we consult and get views from a wide range of people to make sure that the definition of families that we use in this legislation is as accurate as possible and includes deceased family members of service personnel to make sure that they can still access the Commissioner. So I hope that gives her reassurance on this. In relation to the inclusion of minority groups, as someone who represents part of one of the minority communities that she is saying, let me be entirely clear that we want the Commissioner to engage across a whole range of different communities within our armed forces family. It is really important that they do so. having an exhaustive list, or as we've heard indeed from the member from North Durham, a list that is not exhausted, leaving out people with disabilities, which I think would be a concern if this were passed in there, because I think the intention of the Honourable Lady is to provide a focus on minorities. We would expect the Commissioner to be able to make that decision themselves in order to deliver that. Very briefly.
I know the Minister will have read Amendment 2 in detail and is therefore aware for the record that Amendment 2 does include the words including but not limited to, and therefore includes individuals with disabilities and others, which obviously the members for North Durham and the member for Stafford were concerned about.
Grateful for that intervention. I think I think it highlights the danger of a list that she does, and I would expect that in future amendments she tables, I perhaps think she'll veer away from lists to avoid that problem again in the future. Briefly, just on the inheritance tax, the Right Honourable Gentleman mentioned earlier, the Veterans Minister has indeed replied, as I committed to at Defence Questions on the 6th of January. Existing provisions in the Inheritance Act 1984 will continue to ensure that attributable deaths of active members are exempt from inheritance tax. As the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, this is the point that is a matter for the Treasury, and indeed for their consultation. It would be wrong of me to preempt the result of that genuine consultation conducted by my Treasury colleagues, and so he'll understand that perhaps he will need to refer that once the Treasury have had a chance to consider the matters in play. I expect nonetheless that he will be bringing that to a vote because there is a certain level of politics that I appreciate the Right Honourable Gentleman has to play with this. It is certainly true that our armed forces deserve better than they've experienced over the last 14 years. Hollowed out and underfunded, living in accommodation which frankly is not good enough, falling morale every single year of the last 14 years. These are the areas that we seek to change as a government, and the landmark Armed Forces Commissioner Bill is intending to deliver a better service for our armed forces and, importantly, their families together. We have a lot of work to do to undo the damage, but I hope that on a cross-party basis, the message can go out loud and clear from this House today that creating an independent Armed Forces Commissioner, a champion for those people who serve in our military and their families, is a good thing that enjoys cross-party support. I urge all colleagues to support this bill.
Is it your pleasure that new clause 1 be withdrawn? Helen Maguire.
Yes, Madam Deputy. The reassurance received from the Government today.
New clause by Leigh withdrawn. Amendment 9 has been selected for separate decision. I call Mark Francois to move Amendment 9 formally. The question is Amendment 9 be made. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No.
As on the order paper, as many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. And the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Rebecca Paul and Andrew Snowden. The tellers for the noes, Gerald Jones and Kate Dearden. Order.
Ayes to the right, 192. The noes to the left, 338.
The ayes were 192. The noes were 338. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlocked. Amendment 10 has been selected for separate decision. I call Mark Francois to move Amendment 10 formally.
Formally, Ma'am.
The question is that Amendment 10 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. No! Division, clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as have that say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Rebecca Paul, Andrew Snowden. Tellers for the noes, Gerald Jones, Kate Baden.
ayes to the right, 191. The noes to the left, 338.
The ayes were 191. The noes were 338. So the noes have it. Unlock. Amendment 2 has been selected for a separate decision. I call Helen Maguire to move Amendment 2 formally.
Move formally.
The question is that Amendment 2 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! Division, clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. The tellers for the ayes, Charlie Maynard, Bobby Dean. The tellers for the noes, Gerald Jones, Kate Gaydon. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 76. The noes to the left, 349.
The ayes were 76, the noes were 349. So the noes have it unlocked. Consideration completed. Third reading.
Now.
Minister to move third reading.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill is now read a third time. It's a privilege to open the third reading debate and to reach this milestone in establishing the Armed Forces Commissioner. The first duty of any government is to keep our nation safe, and at the heart of that security are the dedicated men and women of our armed forces and the families who support them. It was a priority for this government to move quickly and introduce this bill in our first session, and I'm grateful for all the members on a cross-party basis for their cooperation in getting this bill this far in the space of only a few short months. I would like to thank everyone who has played a role in getting the bill to this stage, particularly the parliamentary staff who have worked on the bill and the officials in the Ministry of Defence who have moved at pace to deliver it. It can be all too rare an occasion for this House to find itself in agreement, so I'm grateful to the members on all sides, including on the official opposition, for their support for the bill and for the role of the new Armed Forces Commissioner. I want to thank the Right Honourable Member for Rayleigh and Wickford and the Member for Epsom and Ewell, alongside all members of the Bill Committee, for their constructive scrutiny throughout. And I think this is testament to the pride which is felt on all sides of the House for our exceptional armed forces and our shared recognition of the service and sacrifices they and their families make to keep us all safe. I also want to thank the witnesses who gave evidence to the committee, including the Service Complaints Ombudsman for the Armed Forces, Mariette Hughes, who has provided invaluable feedback during on her time in office and has showed such enthusiastic support for what this bill is trying to achieve. I must thank her and her team for the hard work in rescuing much of the service complaint system and getting it to be in the good shape that it is today. To RBL, Help for Heroes, SAFA, COBSIO, the Defence Medical Welfare Service, the Army Benevolent Fund, the Royal Marines Charity, the RAF Benevolent Fund and Army's Family Federation, thank you not only for their valuable insights and thought-provoking participation at committee stage, but also for their tireless work representing our service personnel and their families. Their views will be crucial to ensuring the Commissioner is a success. And I think it's clear from the evidence we have heard and the views shared in this House that an independent Armed Forces Commissioner is the champion we need to improve service life and to represent our service personnel and their families. At a time of increasing instability and heightened tension, we are asking more of our serving personnel, but they have been badly let down, and we are facing a crisis in recruitment, a crisis in retention, and a crisis in morale. For the past 2 years, more people have been leaving our armed forces than joining, and morale hit a record low under the previous government. Our forces and their families have been failed for far too long, and that is why this government is determined to renew the nation's contract with those who serve, and the establishment of an Armed Forces Commissioner is a major step forwards. I previously mentioned to the House that this bill was inspired by the long-established German Parliamentary Commissioner for the Armed Forces, and I would like to pay tribute to Dr. Eva Hogel, who is a superb example of how we can champion and provide a voice to our armed forces. Our proposed Armed Forces Commissioner, like the German Commissioner, will have the power to consider the full breadth of welfare issues which may impact service life. There will be a direct point of contact for our forces and their families. The bill before us grants the Commissioner the necessary access to personnel, information and defence sites to be able to proactively launch investigations, shine a spotlight on issues facing service personnel and their families, and make recommendations to Parliament. They will be able to investigate individual concerns and launch wide-ranging thematic investigations. The bill also provides for the Commissioner to absorb the existing powers of the Service Complaints Ombudsman for the Armed Forces, and as we heard from the current Ombudsman during the committee stage, her remit is too narrow and doesn't allow her to explore the so what behind the complaints that she oversees. The new powers will allow the Commissioner to do just that. situating the service complaint system in a wider landscape of service welfare and providing that coherent, independent view of those issues facing our serving personnel and their families. At this time of increasing threat, it has never been more important to raise awareness of the service and sacrifices made by our armed forces and the issues facing the families who stand beside them. We have discussed on the floor of the House today and last month during committee how critical it is for the Commissioner to be independent and impartial, with the discretion to decide what welfare issues they investigate. I hope there is no doubt that our intention is that the Commissioner will act as an independent champion for the armed forces and hold this government and future governments to account. They will challenge ministers, strengthen parliamentary oversight and raise awareness of the issues facing our forces. Now, several members have also spoken about the bill's application to veterans, and I'm grateful for members across the House for those questions, and particularly for the contributions of those who have themselves served our armed forces. I'd like to reiterate that this bill is deliberately tightly drawn to focus on those who are currently serving and their families. This is, we believe, looking at the continuous attitude surveys where the crisis that we are facing in retention and recruitment and morale actually is. There are specific issues which need to be addressed for those people who serve in uniform today and their families. The role of the Armed Forces Commissioner as an independent champion for our forces is significant, and it is also long overdue. The issues facing our veterans population are distinct, and as the Secretary of State set out at second reading, we are certain that a more effective way of improving support for veterans will be to fully implement the Armed Forces Covenant in law, work which is already in train, being led by the Minister for Veterans and People. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, we must renew the whole nation's contract with those who serve. The Armed Forces Commissioner is a major step in commencing this important work. This is landmark legislation to establish an independent Armed Forces Commissioner with the mission to improve service life. I therefore commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. Shadow Minister James Cartledge.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I begin by congratulating and thanking all honourable and right honourable members who have contributed to the passage of the bill and all those who served on the bill committee. As I said at second reading, we recognise that the government have a clear mandate for this piece of legislation with the worthy goal of improving day-to-day service life in our armed forces. We strongly share that goal and want the bill to succeed. But of course, as my honourable friend for Spelthorne said earlier, we also have performed the role of a critical friend of the bill and have raised a number of specific issues. Specifically, my right honourable friend, the Shadow Veterans and Armed Forces Minister, today raised important points which we've moved to amendment, in fact both relating to tax measures that have come forward under this tax-raising government, on specifically death in service and continuity of education allowance known as CEA. I think the key thing I'd say on death in service, based on the response from the Armed Forces Minister at report stage, is of course we understand there is a consultation happening on inheritance tax which expires tomorrow. What we wanted to know is that the Ministry of Defence have communicated to the Treasury that they oppose this measure and that they hope this imposition will not be imposed on those who serve in our armed forces, because it would be a very disproportionate and significant increase in inheritance tax. And I think my right honourable friend from Raelene Whitford put it in a very moving speech about the impact this would have. I'm sure none of us in the chamber today would want to see that, so we hope that he has written to the Treasury that they listen to his advice and that they cancel this proposal. On continuity of education allowance, there's a very simple reason why we wanted to move this amendment today. We want to see the department continuing to monitor the impact of this new tax and its impact on those who choose to send their children to independent school who serve in the military, not least because of the stability it provides in a life which is subject to very much the opposite, not least those who are deployed abroad. It gives them that stability to have access to schools where they can board, and of course most of that capacity is in the independent sector, now subject to a huge 20% tax imposition. So we wanted to see that monitored by the Armed Forces Commissioner, and if anyone doubts the reason for that,
I can confirm, in our office, we have received many emails from serving personnel, as people in the Army, Navy and Air Force today, who are extremely concerned on the impact on them and are having to weigh up their future. I just read one email extract I received from the wife of an Army officer with 2 children in boarding school, 1 junior, 1 senior. She says, with the sudden introduction of VAT on school fees, something that was not foreseen when we made our decision, we will face an additional £14,500 per year in costs. This is simply not sustainable for our family, and my husband is now considering leaving the Army as a result. This is not a minor matter. If we're worried about retention, having people like that considering leaving is the last thing any of us surely would want to see. So we're obviously disappointed that that amendment was defeated, but the parliamentary arithmetic speaks for itself. Madam Deputy Speaker, on the issue of accommodation, the final issue I want to talk about, an incredibly important one. Just to remind the House what I said at second reading. Referring to my time as Minister of Defence Procurement, responsible for the Defence Estate, I said, and I quote, I wanted to see us potentially buying back the Defence Estate in England and Wales from Annington so that we could plan a full rebuild and regeneration of the estate. Well, I'm delighted that since I said that, the deal has been concluded by the government. This is a deal which the negotiations for which I started as a minister, following the successful legal challenges initiated by the previous Conservative Defence Procurement Minister, Jeremy Quinn, and then brought forward as a deal with huge effort in the department, particularly, I must say, from DIO. You know, they've come in for criticism in some reports on the, for example, the response to some of the winter problems we had 2 years ago. But my experience of DIO leadership was that they were as passionate as I was about getting that deal through, and we're now in a far better position. Now, why does it matter? Well, there are many welfare issues which the Commissioner will have to deal with, but I think, as the Honourable Lady for Epsom and Ewell, who speaks for the Liberal Democrats, said, accommodation will surely feature prominently, and we now have the means to address the issue strategically rather than through year-to-year sticking plaster. And I can assure the House that given my role in driving that deal forward, I want to assure ministers that my right honourable friend who shares my passion for housing and armed forces accommodation and I will seek to contribute to the plan of how we move forward towards a better defence estate. In the meantime, we look forward to continuing to engage on these matters as the Armed Forces Commissioner becomes a reality.
The question is that the bill be now read the 3rd time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.